Hello to everyone out there. I appreciate you coming to our session this morning. As I was mentioned, I am currently teaching an effort area school district, which is located in Pennsylvania, grades 6 through 12. So what I'm going to share with you is basically some things that I've learned over the years with getting students using MakeMusic Cloud, as well as how to kind of implement it into their practice routine and just getting them to learn how to use the program as well as practice more effectively outside of the classroom. So let me get my screen working and everything here. So hopefully that's working and everybody can see that. So the whole idea of say it, play it, I know it's not a new idea. We all talk about it as educators, getting kids to learn to verbalize what they're trying to practice and also verbalize counting rhythms and just all that together. And one way I've really tried to put this together is in a little session called Say It, Play It. And it's something I do kind of share out with my parents every year when we start using MakeMusic in sixth grade. That's when the students start to use the software. And I really try to give parents an overview of what the expectations are for them to be using the program. So that's kind of where this session comes from. So I've kind of incorporated some of that as well as some other ideas and thoughts as well. So we know students are learning if they can say the notes and finger the notes in time and they can play it. And we're just going to talk a little bit about the different types of learning styles that we know students have and that we try to incorporate as educators into our teaching. And just get my little interview. So what are the goals of this session? So MakeMusic Cloud meets different learning styles. One of the things I believe is that students need to be taught how to practice. Students need to be taught how to use MakeMusic Cloud effectively. Parents and guardians need to understand how the student should be practicing and what it should look like and sound like at home. And parents and guardians need to know how students are being assessed in regards to practice and the expectations. And that's something that I really kind of tried to focus on over the last couple of years because I found students were not really doing what I wanted them to do outside of the lesson and the classroom. So first thing I want to talk about is all of us are aware of this, I'm sure, the types of learning styles. We have auditory learner, kinesthetic learner, visual learner. And one of the areas that I think MakeMusic really accelerates at is really the convergence of all three types of learning styles. It's interesting to me that in this diagram, they kind of show musical as being the kinesthetic auditorial. But I think we all realize there's also the visual component because you have to be able to read the music as well as hear it and move your fingers according to what notes you need to produce on the instrument. So I really think that MakeMusic has, with the program MakeMusic Cloud, it really allows our students to kind of meet this convergence in the middle where we can get both visual, auditory, and kinesthetic learning happening all at the same time. And that was kind of my focus as I was thinking about how to get students to use the software more effectively. So here's a question. I don't know if I know you can respond in some way, but I mean, do we believe that most students know how to correctly practice? I'd love to hear anybody's comments on that before I go on to that next section, if that's possible.
Yeah, just a reminder for everybody in our session, you can post comments in the comments section on Feedloop, and you can also do the questions in Q&A as well. So give you a second to go ahead and drop your comments to Steve's question in the comments in Feedloop. Steve, if you'd like to keep going, I can interrupt if I do see some comments.
Sure. Okay. So one of the things I found is that a lot of students don't really practice the way we would like them to at home. Um, One of the things I noticed over the years of private teaching and even teaching with my students at school is that a lot of times when they practice, their tendency is to want to, whatever you assign them, they just want to run through it. And they think that's practicing it. And they don't really learn how to master what the notes are or what the rhythms are or how to put it all together. Their version of practice is, well, I started at the beginning, I got to the end. Didn't matter if there's 1,000 mistakes in between, but I practiced it. Which I really think is, even many of us that were older, when our teachers were teaching us back in our time, that was kind of like what we did too. It probably took a lot of us until we got older or got to college to really learn how to like effectively break down our practice sessions and really work on what we need to work on. So one of the things I know that they don't know how to practice correctly, they need to learn to combine the kinesthetic learning, placement of fingers, with hearing correct pitches and rhythms. Students need to understand how to break down those types of learning so they can successful in their instrument. So I will say my process with my sixth graders, this usually takes a good chunk of the year for me to get this to happen better than it does when and then even it's continuous process with my seventh and eighth graders as well. And then by the time I get them to ninth grade, most of my students in my high school band understand how to do this correctly. Whether they do it correctly is up to them, but they at least have learned the process that we're trying to achieve in getting them to effectively use all these different things.
Hey, Steve, just so
So,
you know, you have 4 responses, and
oh, do I?
yeah, and I would say everybody's agreeing with exactly
Yeah,
what you just said, and I'll
perfect.
add my 2 cents in there and say yes. So Dave Schubert was saying he continually teaches it, but what students hear and incorporate into what they practice is completely different. Deshawn said sometimes my students are about 50-50 split when it comes to knowing how to practice. Someone else said, no, as with most things, it is up to us to model. And what a great term to use, modeling. That has been a constant thread through almost every session at Connect, this 2023 Connect session. And we actually had a clinician yesterday who's really versed in what you're talking about, from the approaching it from the reading standpoint, and that's Rachel Maxwell. So I encourage you all to go back and review the sessions once they're released beyond the practice room. And then your last comment here, even when I tell show take them through the process of correct practicing, they still don't want to do it the right way because it's tedious to them. And that's something let's talk about a little bit later, because there's a way to take the tedium out of what we want them to do, or some ways. Not there's not like a magic pill, but there are some ways we can take the tedium out. Okay, keep going.
So, yeah. So these next couple slides, this actual slide here is one I pulled from a presentation I gave my parents this past fall, and so I kind of integrated that with this session today. So, one of my things is we all make music cloud. We talk about one of the great things and tools it gives us is focus, practice, and really getting students to, if we teach this correctly, we model it correctly, we hope that they will get to focus practice. That's our goal. So, one of the things I write, this part I goes out to the parents is, students are expected to use the program. At my school, we are one-to-one devices starting in, actually now I think post-COVID, we are down to at least first grade. Everybody first through sixth grade has an iPad, and then 7 through 12 have laptops provided by the district. So I really point out to the fact that our school district has invested in the program for the cost of both the devices and for the software. So I want parents and guardians to understand that students need to use this program. It should be what we use at home to practice. And one thing I do, which I'll kind of say this, is like I really don't use and have kids buy a method book anymore. Um, I use all the different method books that are available through MakeMusic Cloud. So I kind of have it all built into that. And that would be a whole nother session talking about building units and all that kind of stuff. But that's one of the things I really enforce up front, is that I want them to be using the program at home and not just getting their sheet music out and practicing, but using what I put into the program.
So, Steve, you just echoed what I'm hearing from a bunch of educators, and again, it was presented in another session yesterday. Is MakeMusic Cloud is the method book now, because it has 199 method books in there. You have access to everything, and you can use any and all of it if it meets the needs for your particular situation with your students. So, I really like that comment. Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, it's made such a difference. And it's funny because, our kids have become much, I mean, we call them digital natives. I think we'd all agree as educators that, at least I feel as a Gen Xer, that there's a lot more stuff I do better than they do on their machines, because I've had to learn it growing up, where they just kind of had it. So they're not as apt to explore or hack through stuff. They just kind of want to do what they know how to do. But I think it's a key component. And what I found is, it's so funny. I'll have students that, like, because I used it as the method book and all their band music is on there as well, a lot of times they just leave their folders in the band room in their slot, and they don't take their folder home, which is a good thing, because that means I don't have to worry about those students showing up for band and not having their sheet music, because we do use that for rehearsal because it's just easier. You're not flipping screens. But it's just funny because I see them, they're all very good about, holding on to their digital device and bringing it along. So that's works pretty well. And then one of the things I share with parents is, I kind of found this article that was talking about, like, should you force your students to practice? And I just want to highlight a couple things on there, because I feel that that's an area that we really struggle with today, in the current, I don't know, at least it's what I see in the culture that I deal with, is that a lot of parents want to say, well, I don't want to force my kid to practice. I don't want to make them practice. And I think one of the challenges we have in music education is that if you're competing against, like, I think we're a lot of times we're competing against all the other things that pull kids' attention. So we have video games, we have all the organized sports that are available that don't stop. Everything runs all year round. One of the advantages I think parents see is that they can easily drop their kids off out of practice for football or baseball or softball or whatever they play. And for 2 hours, they're practicing, and the parent is not involved in that practice unless they're coaching. So I think that's one of the areas that's a challenge for us as music educators, is it's getting parents to realize that they need to be involved in the process. So this is an article I found, and it really talks about whether you should force your kids to practice. But it really talks about the parents being involved and giving positive feedback and praise, and getting them to also set a schedule, which I think is the biggest problem I see continuously with students, is not having a set time. Part of it's the family. The family's super busy, so they're running everywhere. And I'm going to kind of hopefully come back and talk about that schedule part as we get into another portion of the session. But I just kind of a little article that I thought was really interesting, and to kind of help parents feel like, hey, yeah, I need to be actively involved in this process, because it is different. Home practice is very individualized. We come to school, and then we have the large group instruction. Unlike our athletic components, where it's like, oh, you go to baseball practice and it's the whole team practicing. We don't get to do that every day. Some of us, depending on your schedule, it might be once or twice a week. So I think that has a huge component as well.
Hey, Steve, that concept of the athletic practice is the event, and it's the fact that they are with their fellow peers. They want to be there. They're their friends. So
Right.
what I've heard from students and parents is since starting to use MakeMusic Cloud, that has alleviated that because they're no longer feeling alone in the practice room because they're practicing with something of professional recording. So that takes a lot of that onus off. And the fact that we can communicate through the comments box and also the assessment we set up, it's a little less singular solo. I'm in the room alone. What do I do? And because we're crafting through our dialogue in the assignment instructions as to what we want them to do, and we've already modeled it also probably in the classroom, it takes a little bit of that I'm alone in the room thing out of it. But I do agree with you at 9,000%. Students are overscheduled, and that is our problem, is trying to find that time slot where we can have some effective, deliberate practice. But MakeMusic Cloud seems to alleviate a little bit of that. It's just me instead of I'm with the team.
Definitely. I mean, I definitely know for particularly all the band literature, having students being able to practice and hear the entire ensemble, it's so much more engaging because, you know, when you used to tell students, hey, go practice your part, and they're practicing and they don't have the melody, say they're like a baritone or a tube or a trombone, maybe it doesn't have the melody. It was so boring for them to practice that because they didn't understand how it fit with the whole. And now the ability for us to do that through this process really allows students to feel more engaged with the whole. And it is kind of funny. I do sometimes pick music that's not in MakeMusic Cloud, very rarely, but it happens. And my students literally have said to me, "Oh, it's not in MakeMusic. We're gonna suck." That's what they say. And I go, "Why?" And they go, "Well, because kids won't. The rest of us won't. They know their peers are like, well, they won't practice it if they can't do it through the program." And I'm like, well, let's hope that's not always true. But I think it's funny the reality that they have come to realize through that process, which I think is awesome. So I want to talk about when you're using the program, probably the most important tool that you need to teach. There's a lot of tools, but one of the areas we really need to focus on in order to get our kids to focus and in their practice time, and this is where the whole say it, play it comes in. I'll show you some examples of students actually doing this in the classroom this past year. But the first thing we really need to do is we really need to teach our students how to use the loop tool. If you've ignored the process of teaching this, please know how valuable this is if you don't teach students how to use this. So we're talking about the focus practice. And this is a piece that we just did this past spring with my 6th grade band. And one of the areas I knew that was a difficult area was this measure 29 with this upbeat 8th note part going into and the tie right here on the G, and playing that and getting my clarinets to really get that in time. So just kind of, if you're not familiar with the loop tool, once you open a program, you want to go up here to the loop button. So I always tell students, step 1, click where you want to start. Step 2, click the loop tool. Step 3, hit the set button. Now you see you have handles. And I always tell students too, to try to use a small portion, no more than 2 measures, sometimes only 1 measure, to set up your initial loop. And then as you get that master, we move on and add another set of measures, and then we add a grouping of 4 measures, and then we add a group of 6 measures. But what the loop tool does is it does exactly that. It allows us to loop a process. And you need to also remind them to slow the tempo down. That is the other biggest pet peeve I have as a teacher, is getting students to always remember to slow the tempo down. I will have kids message me and they'll be like, Mr. Goss, I can't play this because it's too fast. And of course, my initial response right away is, did you slow it down? Well, no. Well, that's the number one problem. So when I create a lot of my assignments in the beginning, I'm setting them to no tempo required. And I even put that in the message, no tempo required. But as we know, students don't read all of our directions ever. And so we deal with that. But with the loop tool, what's such a beauty is that I can slow this down to In this case, I'm going to drop it down to like 100 beats per minute. And I'm going to hit play, and it's going to, if you're not familiar with this feature, it's going to play this section. It's going to loop right back. So the other thing is I can have with my tracks here, I forgot to mention this. I tell students to turn off the accompaniment and put my part on. They don't need to hear the whole band and at this moment and allow them to be confused by all the other rhythms and other pitches that are coming at them. If they use my part, they're able to hear just their instrument. And so that's the step one, is getting them to set up that loop tool. And then I'm going to demonstrate. The next thing I would have the students do, and I'm going to show you a video of the students actually doing this, is I have them have the loop tool on at a slow enough tempo, and they have to be able to say the note name while they finger it. So being able to go through this at a slow enough tempo and fingering B, A, F, C, B, F, G, F, G, A, B, and being able to finger that. Now, that might be too fast right now. If I was fingering it and I'm just learning it, I would slow it down maybe to 60 beats per minute and just practice being able to get those fingers down. Because now you're employing the auditory learning and the kinesthetic learning at the same time. Now, what has been really interesting to me is as I have students to say the note names, at first they start to verbalize it just as B, A, F, C, B. But eventually, if we loop it enough, I've actually gotten to the point where kids start to sing it without me saying it. You'll hear them sing the actual pitches. So then we're now going another level, and I didn't even have to teach that. They just automatically did it. So that's kind of the first step in getting this process, is getting them to make that loop, figure out what they need to work on, slowing it down, being able to say it as they put their finger names down. And I tell them they are not allowed to play it until they can literally finger all the notes in the correct time and rhythm on their instrument, and then they can play it. And the results are astronomical in terms of their ability to pick it up. So I do have an example of that a little bit later. I'll show you. The other thing is teaching rhythm, doing that the same way. So I actually just pulled up something from sound percussion, a snare drum example, but I can use that to teach anybody rhythm. I don't have to have just my percussionists doing this. I can be doing this with my instrumentalists that are wind players as well. So, here's an example with syncopation in it. And again, doing the same process, having my part on. And in this case, it's a pretty short excerpt, but I know from teaching this, my students are going to struggle with that syncopation measure right off the bat. So what I'll do is I'll set up a loop. And the other thing you can do this is, like, if you have a projection device, if you have a Promethean board, or you have an LCD player in your band room, which I have TVs in mine and I can project to it. You put this up on the screen, you work your whole lesson group with this. And then you determine, depends on your teaching process. Do you have them use Kodai, or are you using counting syllables? I personally use counting syllables, even though the university that I teach at also is very Kodai heavy. But in this case, I prefer to have them counting, and I would just have this up there going 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 1 and 3, 4, and having them say it. Then not only say it, clap it, and then eventually be able to play it on one pitch. If I'm doing with wind players, obviously with percussion, I would have them physically going through this and working on it, playing it on the drum pad as well. So the key factor there is really setting up that loop tool right away from the beginning and teaching them how to set it up and change the tempo. Without doing that, students will not do it. So you have to really be persistent for the first month or so.
Steve, quick question. Do you ever use the incremental change?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
So I should have said that. If you're not aware, you can go over here and hit increase by, and you can either hit the plus button, and like if I do it that way, it'll increase it by 5 clicks. So let me just run it real quick, and then you can hear it get faster on the second take. I'll watch this over here. Went up to 95. So I will demonstrate that, and I actually have the students working on that. And you'll see in my video, I have a Promethean board right in the front, and I can project right up there and have the students do it. And then I also have them, they have their devices open. I have them also show me that they can do it on their own devices as part of that lesson. Because if I don't do that, then I don't know for sure that they know how to do it. And I want to make sure they can do it.
Hey, Steve, we have a question.
Yeah.
One of our viewers today wants to know, are you willing to share the slides you were using in this presentation?
I can. I forgot to give them to Felicia earlier. So do I just send them to Felicia, or how would you like me to do that?
We could do that. Yeah, I believe.
Yeah.
We'll make them available on the replay.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So here's a live example. And this I did, again, this was actually a video slideshow that I sent out to the 6th grade parents at the end of marking period 1, after I spent all of marking period 1 teaching my students how to use MakeMusic Cloud, and particularly enforcing the idea of what say it and play it, the process should look like, what it should sound like at home. So here's the video. I'll make it full screen. And this is what I sent home to parents, this exact slide like this, so that parents will understand what it should look like and sound like at home. This is what practice with smart music should look like. Ready? So they're going to say it one more time and finger the notes on the screen. Now we're going to play it this time through. Ready? Breath. Okay, class, I'm going to ask you this question. Could you play that 30 seconds ago before we did that? Could you play it like you just played it? Did you have any rhythm problems when I had you do it without the smart music? So you couldn't play it the way you just played it, is the answer, correct?
Yes.
So you understand the expectation of how that we're supposed to say it and then play it. Okay. So obviously one of the students, she's actually pretty good. She could kind of play it, but I didn't do the pre-session where I just had it on the board static, and we had just got the piece of music like that week. And so I just had them try to play it. Of course, they had trouble with the 8th notes. They had trouble with the dotted quarter note, and just putting all together like that with them hearing it and putting, kinesthetically and auditory, putting it together, they were able to do that within a couple takes like that. So it really kind of shows how the students can learn at a much more accelerated rate and with a very focused aspect of that practicing session. So, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. This is what practice. So another thing, I don't know how many of you, you can respond in the Q&A if you still use some type of practice sheet. I know when I first started teaching back in the 90s, I would still make up a sheet with the week on it, and then you had to write in how many times you practiced and how many minutes you practiced. And then that was part of their practice grade that I would give them for my students, and kind of a way of seeing whether they were, actually practicing at home. The problem is and we know this, I'm sure some of us would agree, we know that kids or parents are not truthful in this at all. I've had students come back and they show 30 minutes every day, and then you have them sit down and go to play whatever you were supposed to work on. They can't play it. And you're like, what did you do this whole week? Well, I practiced. Well, how? What did that look like? Because you're saying you practiced 30 minutes, but it doesn't sound like you practiced 30 minutes. So when I started using MakeMusic Cloud over a decade ago, the first thing, besides making it the method book, as I mentioned earlier, I also eliminated practice sheets. And unfortunately, my person below me who just retired after 40 years, he still was using practice sheets. And it's so funny because when the kids would come to me in 6th grade, I would be like, how many of you handed your practice sheets in with 30 minutes a day? Okay, how many of you actually did that? And then they would all admit that they didn't do it. Parents would just sign it. They just show, hey, mom, I need you to sign this, boom, and that was it. So one of the great features that you can use is the analytics feature. So I'm going to show you real quick for those of you who might not know where that is. It's located in the left-hand side of MakeMusic where the home button is. Over here, you have to scroll down to where it says analytics, right here. And what this allows me to do as a teacher is I can go in and look at my classes and see who is practicing and when they're practicing and what they're practicing. Now, what made me really happy, believe it or not, this is live. This is one of my classes today. I have all my marching band music is up on Smart Music, and we have practice this next week. And it makes me happy to see that there are graphs here on these days. And I know that means that they're even though it says exploration, because the way I have it assigned in MakeMusic, it doesn't show up as assigned material, it shows up as exploration material. But because it's something I put in through Compose. But anyway, that made me happy today. I was like, I opened this up and I'm like, wow, that's good to see that people are working on the show. So you can break that down by student, 30 days, all custom date, all this. And even though you might be like, well, it's not a lot of time, you got to remember it only shows you when students hit play how much time they spent. So if they're just looking at it on a static screen, it's not going to register as practice. But if they hit play, it does. And this is super powerful because instead of the practice sheets, I'm now able to go to a kid and say, open your analytics. In fact, I train my kids when they come into their lesson, they have to have their machine open on the analytics page so that I can see how many bar graphs they have for the week. And some kids are pretty shy about the fact that I only have one day. Yeah, I noticed that. You have one day. We need to do better. We need to try to get 3 or 4 days in next week, blah, blah, blah. As Ted mentioned earlier, we know kids are really overscheduled. And trying to get parents to understand that this is how I'm assessing them as well, I think helps a little bit. So let me show you what that kind of looks like when I had students talk about this as part of the message that went home to parents. So this was my slide. Practice is recorded in MakeMusic Cloud every time the student logs in. Explain that. Goal is 5 times a session a week. And then here's the student explaining, one of my 6th graders explaining how this is supposed to work.
And this is how to practice smart music.
Right. So Mackenzie, on your iPad here, can you explain to me what this is showing, these bar graphs under practice analysis?
Basically, it's just showing that I only practiced 2 times this week.
And so when you see these on here, it shows the amount of minutes you practice, and it means you actually use Smart Music and you had to hit the play button and practice with the program, correct?
Yeah.
Right. So what we want to see, parents, is we would like to see at least 5 logins a week. So out of 7 days, I should see at least 5 times that there's a purple bar graph in there. Okay, I'm not concerned about it being like more than 5 or 6 minutes because it's only recording when the student is hitting the play button. However, I do expect them to be using the program. Okay? So that's a way I kind of try to communicate home to parents what the expectation is uh, in regards to what that practice should look like. I did see somebody had a question. So Ted or somebody, can you tell me what that question might have been?
Well, the question was they wanted to know if your slides are going to be made available. That's one. And the good
Oh,
news is if they refresh their feed loop screen, we now have them up there and they'll be able to download them. And the other thing that was just mentioned, one of our viewers is talking about they're using a self-assessment that the students complete at the end of each week. So I assume it's still like a maybe it's, you know, they didn't give detail, but it they're asking their students to self-assess, you know, what they accomplish, I guess, during the week. It'd be nice to get maybe some more detail on that, but that sounds like a really great approach as well.
yeah, definitely. And again, you can kind of incorporate the both too, because like with this, as students come in and they show me, as I mentioned, it's kind of a self-assessment. They're like, oh, because when they see it, you know, sometimes they think they practiced, they touched their instrument a lot more than they did in a week, and then they realize, oh crap, I only logged in twice this week. Yeah, yeah. And Susie, she logged in 3 times, and it's not really a one against the other. It's just trying to encourage and create that. I try to create the culture of this is the expectation, but also, hey, you're part of this team, and if you're not putting in the same amount of effort as the other people are, you're going to hold back the overall team. So I think that's another thing you can really build into that aspect of using the analytics and just kind of showing students what they did in a week.
I do want to echo just right now. I just refreshed the feed loop screen, and there is a link at the bottom under files. It says Steve slide deck, so you're all able to grab those.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm kind of getting to the end here because this is kind of what I was focused on. Here's what I hopefully I covered this with students being taught how to practice. I think that is our number one goal. In at least in my goal in this session. And if you can master getting students to practice properly, you're going to see the results in your overall ensemble, because kids come in prepared, knowing how to play the music that you're presenting to them. The other things need to be taught is how to use MakeMusic Cloud effectively. And I say that because I have other colleagues in other districts that will buy MakeMusic Cloud as a program, and then they'll tell me later, well, my kids just don't use it. My kids don't. I go, well, why aren't they using it? Well, they don't like it. Why don't they like it? Well, they're not successful with it. Blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, but how are you as the educator teaching the students how to use the software? And a lot of times the answer is, well, I just gave it to them and I put assignments up there. Well, that doesn't work. I mean, they're not going to use it. You have to teach them how to use the program. I know we think they're digital natives. However, they still need to be taught. I mean, we don't throw out other programs like, you know, our students have to learn how to use Google Classroom. They have to learn how to use Schoology. They have to learn those programs. The other thing is, I think it's important, again, I cannot stress it enough that parent and guardians need to understand how the students should be practicing and what it should look and sound like at home. Because then when you have those conversations with the parents, because maybe the student is struggling and they're not really meeting the expectations, you can obviously, I can have that conversation. Have you heard them doing this at home? Have you had them? Can you, you know, I'll send them a screenshot of the analytics and say, have you, this is what I can see, you know, your student can see the same thing. Have you had a conversation about, you know, when they're practicing, what they're practicing? And then knowing that there is some sort of assessment being regards to practice and expectations. It just depends on your situation. I know some people do not have their ensemble as a graded class in the lower grades, particularly middle, intermediate and middle school. That's something I really fought for. It's not like a huge grade, but it does come up on the report card for us. And I want parents to know, like, this is part of the assessment process, not only showing up for lessons and preparing the assessments I put in Smart Music for the band music, but also their weekly lessons and what the practice looks like. And then by getting that started in 6th grade, continuing in 7th and 8th in my case, then it just becomes a norm for 9th and 10th, 11th, 12th, which is a fully graded credited class at the high school level that counts towards graduation. So that kind of builds that up. So those were the main points. I think I'm doing pretty good on time here.
Yes, we have a few minutes left.
Yeah.
If there are any questions, now is a great time for you to put them in the Q&A and reach out to Steve. And just a few other words of encouragement, and that is to go back and look at some of the sessions that have already occurred when they become available, because a lot of what Steve has presented here today is being echoed by other sessions and other educators as well across the country. So, you know, there's definitely a linear thread through everything that's been happening so far here. And I don't see any questions at this point, and we have 2 minutes left. Is there anybody out there that wants to ask Steve anything before we? Well, you got a thumbs up. This was great, Steve, and thank you for all the resources. That's good.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, Ted, is there anything else, you and I've talked before that you thought maybe I might have skipped over or wanted to give a little more detail on or anything like that?
No, you've done your usual, awesome presentation with, full examples. And the thing that always impresses me is you answer the first thing I always present, and that's model. Because as you said, if we don't show them how to use it, the expectation can only be a guess. So it's really important that they see, well, here's the tool, how we use the tool, and continue to model it as you go through the year. And you've already experienced that they become comfortable with this procedure, and maybe so much so, like you said, they get uncomfortable when you do something that's not in Smart Music or MakeMusic Cloud. So Dave has a question. He wants to know if any of your students not have access to devices or internet service at home. That's a great question, Dave.
So as I said, our school district provides devices, and I need you to know that we're Title I school. So in the county that I live in, we are 1 in 4 kids on free and reduced lunch. So we're not a wealthy school district in terms of social and economic standing. However, yes, we do have a couple students. It's usually only a couple, because our district did a very good job before we went to one-to-one devices of really sending out surveys and discovering what the internet connectivity was for most students at home. However, perfect example, I had a student move in the district this year. I don't think they were homeless, but they were kind of in a very odd situation, and they did not have access to internet at home. So what I would work out with them is during times in the day, like for example, we had my practice happens during what's called mounts time. And it's a spot in the day that's designed just for band, orchestra, and chorus. And the kids that aren't involved in those ensembles are just back in their homerooms doing other work. So I worked it out with her. I said, hey, on the days you don't have band, which band's only twice a week, and you're not in choir and you're not orchestra, why don't you come down and I'll give you a practice room, and there's internet connectivity in that. And so she would come down right before lunch for about 20 minutes every day that she didn't have band, and she would work on that during that time. So I've done examples like that where students will come at a different time, or even if I'm teaching another lesson, I put one in another practice space or even in my office or some other spot. But fortunately, it's only like 1 or 2 students that we ever have an issue like that with at this point.
Hey, another question. How do you find funding being a Title I school?
I have just really lobbied hard with my school to have this built into the budget. I know that's not true for everyone, but we have spent enough other money as a district on all these other software programs that we use, like Schoology, like Ed, I can't think all the names of the stuff that we have. We have like all this stuff in our, I'm trying to think. I have to look at like, you know, we have Canva now, Khan Academy, all these different things that they're spending money on. So I just basically went to them and said, well, if we're providing all this stuff for these other academics, why can't we provide this? And I will say, I presented all this at a school board many years ago. This is over a decade ago, and showed the school board exactly how this works and had students demonstrating it. And after that, it hasn't been an issue. In fact, we just agreed to, I just was able to go through the process of getting us the discounted rate that MakeMusic offers now on a 3-year contract where you pay per year. But if you commit to 3 years, it lowers it by a huge percentage per student. It's almost $3 per student. And my district was totally cool with that. So I would encourage you to do it that way. If that would be your biggest win, is you really have to show your administration and parents and everybody how much success comes from it. And also I would look for other, if you have any other education foundations or other ways that you can get some grant money, it would be another option for that.
Well, I hate to
just
cut you off. Yeah, it's we're over.
Sorry.
We are. I was just going to say one quick thing about the multi-year discounts. It's 15% for 2 years and 25% for 3 years. If anybody was interested in pursuing that, let us know. But yeah, thank you guys. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Ted, for a wonderful session. Lots of great information.